I want to talk about the undefended heart this evening. It's one of, well, it's basically the lens through which I try and view the world. I first heard this phrase many years ago, maybe 15, 14 years ago, and I mentioned it once, and someone asked me if I would give a Dharma talk on it, and I realized that it's not just a single Dharma talk. It's really, I believe, the essence of what the Buddha invited us to do was just be fully present without any defenses, and um, it's I think really important right now, because it's so easy right now to armor our hearts. There's so much going on, and in fact, people have asked me over the years why I would even want an undefended heart, because of all the stuff that's flying right now. There's all the racism and homophobia and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and misogyny and the violence and the hatred that's just so prevalent and prominent. And so there's the societal aspect, and then there's the messiness of our own lives, and it's really challenging. And there's so many things each of us struggle with. All our lives are different. We all have different experiences in the world, but we all struggle. We all have different challenges. And if we open ourselves to an undefended heart, does that mean we're allowing ourselves to be run over by everything and just going, oh, well, that's kind of the rap that Buddhism has, but that's not what this is about. This is really about, it doesn't mean no boundaries. In fact, it means to live with an undefended heart takes great courage. You bear witness to what's going on. You're totally open to the reality of the moment. But again, as in Buddha's teaching, there's accountability. We can turn towards the awfulness of the world and the messiness of our lives and hold what's happening with equanimity. We don't become robots and automatons and just go through life, but we actually, that's a way of avoiding things, but we invite an intimacy with our experience. We're not in denial about a situation. We're fully cognizant. But again, we don't allow ourselves to be run over. We take care of ourselves. We work to end harm and injustice where we see it, but we're open to the reality of the moment. I think denial is, the Buddha talked about greed, craving, hatred, aversion, and denial, ignorance, as the three underpinnings of all the discomfort, dissatisfaction, dukkha in the world. And so when we're fully present, when we're there, there's the grief, the emotions, the sadness that may come up because of reality, but we don't have that extra level of dukkha that we're adding onto it to be in denial, to try and fight reality, because no one wins a fist fight with reality. And I like the idea of an undefended heart because it brings up so much, and because it's in our mind's eye, that's where our defenses are. Our armor is around our hearts. And I remember one time being asked early on in my meditation practice, so I was kind of sensing into my body and what was in my chest, and somebody asked me what material, because oftentimes when you're with an emotion or a feeling, you go, where do you sense it in your body? Does it have a color, a shape, a texture? And I had this sense that there was this round sphere surrounding my heart that was made of some alien material that could never be broken into by anything on this planet because it was alien. And I went, oh, there's a little armor there. That's a pretty defended heart. And there's a quote from James Baldwin that I think is really apropos here. And he said, I am terrified by the moral apathy and death of heart that is happening in my country. And this, he said, 50, 60 years ago. And you can say it again today. I mean, it's just as valid today as when he wrote it. I'm terrified by the moral apathy and death of heart. So this intentionality about opening our hearts to the suffering of the world. That's what Kuan Yin is all about, her, the bodhisattva of compassion. She hears the cries of the world. It's not turning away, it's turning towards. But in order to live with an undefended heart, we have to know what our armor looks like. It may look like a sphere of alien metal around your heart, but it often shows up as fear. You know, we build walls with fear, desire, craving, thinking something will fix us. You know, if we have enough stuff, then we will be bulletproof, so to speak. We have rigid ideas about people, places, things, and what should or shouldn't be. These deep judgments that we carry, comparisons. And oftentimes, excuse me, the armoring shows up as the hindrances, which are craving, aversion, wanting, not wanting, restlessness, worry, fear, dullness, torpor, which is turning ourselves off. It's just the denial. It's just like, la, la, I'm going over here. It's like sticking our head in the sand or sticking our fingers in our ears, you know, or doubt, just writing the whole thing off. And usually they show up because we're not happy with the way things are. And it's not a conscious choice. Often it's because of our conditioning. That's where this armoring comes from. And Brene Brown also has a few, she, in her book, Daring Greatly, which I read many, many years ago, she talks about living wholeheartedly, which I think is, and, you know, being vulnerable, which is what living with an undefended heart is. It's about being vulnerable. She talks about the shields we developed. Perfectionism. That's one. Because if we're perfect, nothing can hurt us because we're going to be doing it all right. So we're going to, one more time, you can't get me. I'm perfect. And of course, perfection is impossible. So you're doomed to failure, which is dukkha in its own right, because you try harder and it's never going to be perfect. Or numbing. She says numbing is a shield, which is that dullness, that torpor, that hindrance of checking out all the ways we can numb ourselves, sex and drugs and shopping and working. And the world offers us innumerable ways to check out. Social media is a way to numb out as well. Television. Not that these things are innately bad. That's the thing we have to understand. These things in and of themselves are just neutral. It's our relationship to them. It's our relationship to drugs and alcohol and sex and shopping and work and gambling and social media and all the other things that make it, if we're using them to numb ourselves, that is when it becomes a shield. There's another shield, another armor that we have, which I know I've experienced, is self-sufficiency. This inability to ask for help, you know, that kind of is, I think, a sibling to perfectionism, you know. It's like, no, I got it. Don't need help. I don't want to have to be beholden. No, because if I need help, that must mean there's some inadequacy, you know, and I can't admit to an inadequacy. Got to keep the walls up. Can't let you in. Can't show vulnerability. These defenses that we have and these walls are driven by fear. Oftentimes a fear, and I love this line of you know, not getting what we need or losing something that we have. You know, it's the Buddha talks about that in the Second Noble Truth. We cling to pleasure, and not just, you know, party pleasure, but wanting it to be comfortable, wanting it to be okay. It's like, I hear the phrase toxic positivity. It's fine. It's fine. It'll be fine. And it's like, no, it sucks. It's really painful. It's like, yeah, but it'll be fine. I have a friend who talks about growing up in her family. Everything was fine all the time. And you could just tell how bad things were because fine, the octave got higher and higher and higher. Fine, 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 fine. And when it was really high, then you knew everything was crap. So yeah, it's that denial of reality. It's we want everything to be fine. That's the second noble truth. You know, the only problem is all these really sophisticated defenses and walls and armor that we have built is that it doesn't just keep out the bad, which it doesn't. Stuff still happens. We feel it, and then we fight the feeling, but it keeps out the pleasant and the good as well. The armor keeps everything out, and we keep ourselves in. These defenses do not work. They might for a time, and they may have been put in place because they were necessary for the situation we had in our lives. Perhaps we had to develop that toughness. We had to develop ways of being in the world that protected us at the moment. But at some point they're not necessary anymore, but we keep carrying them, and they cause suffering, they cause the stress, the dissatisfaction, and we stuff them down. We stuff the feelings down, but they're going to show back up again, and we think we've escaped them, but there they are. There are implicit biases, how we tend to view things, not necessarily conscious. It's how we react to situations. And there's a book called Deep Diversity, and it talks about emotions, and it says emotions exist at a covert level under the surface and an overt level where we see them clearly. It's implicit and explicit. And when we get angry or happy or sad or etc., the emotion has to break our personal threshold before we're aware of experiencing it. And the threshold is our defense. And so before they get to our threshold, they're unconscious. And without full awareness, the emotions influence our behavior and our thoughts and our choices. They're calling the shots if we're not paying attention, if we're not aware. So the practice of chipping away at this armor is making it easier for us to see our emotions, to connect with our feelings, to open up, And as I said, these defenses come from our conditioning, our childhood, our families, school, the messages we receive from the world we live in. We've all been told things. We're not acting right. We don't look right. We don't talk right. We don't love the right people. We're not from the right place. We don't speak the correct language. We don't worship the correct God. Whatever it is, we receive these messages and they percolate, and we create ways to take care of ourselves. Sometimes they're conscious decisions, but really most of the time they're unconscious. We just have to take care of ourselves. And then they harden into rigid practices and habits that may not necessarily serve us when we grow up. And Lama Rod Owens said that we are not responsible for our conditioning, how these things got installed or what happened to us. Obviously, we can't be responsible for what happened to us as kids. And if we live in a world where we are marginalized and oppressed, it's not our fault. But how we are responsible for, recognizing how we've been impacted by the world, because oftentimes it's really harmful, and we cause harm to ourselves and others by these defenses we've developed, and we are responsible for doing something about it. It's like anger. Anger can be a great defense. It could have come in handy, but carrying around anger is like a burning coal, And if we get into the judging mind, comparing mind, that creates a sense of separation. all of these things. Armor, just by its very definition, is a separation. A wall is a separation. So when we have these things, we are isolated, disconnected from the rest of humanity. Our defenses are a denial of reality, and we're living in delusion. We're saying no to the reality of the moment, and our perception is distorted, and dukkha, suffering, is the outcome. And delusion in the mind causes us to think we need this armor. So, if a defended heart is not optimal, how do we get to a place of being undefended? And it's a slow process. Got to say that right off the bat. It's not like one day you have a defended heart and the next day you're like la 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 la. It's not that way, because we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get away from it overnight. It's a slow process of chipping. You know, we don't just tear the walls all down like ripping off a Band-Aid. Someone once told me she was terrified of the idea of an undefended heart, and I can understand that. So it's not, you don't just jump into it full throttle, but you start where you are. So much of what we do, so much of what I say is we start where we are. We allow the idea into our minds even. Is this something feasible? Is this something I think I can do? Maybe you see how you're separate from what's going on right now. You know, letting go of judging, and instead bring kindness and compassion into the mix. Start softening. Oh, I shouldn't be doing this. Oh, how come I get so angry? How come I can't say what I need to say? How come I keep running away? How come I keep doing this? How come I keep doing that? Recognizing the armor and bringing some kindness, some gentleness for perhaps the first time. The heart practices are also really helpful. The practices of loving kindness and compassion and appreciative joy, equanimity. And in fact, the original teaching around metta, loving kindness, in the suttas, the Buddha asked some of his monks to go off into the forest and meditate, and they did, and they found some trees, and they were sitting under the trees, and the devas, the spirits of the trees, were very happy to have them, but then the monks stayed there, and they stayed day after day, and then the devas got annoyed with the monks just hanging out, and so they started kind of haunting them with loud noises and spooky stuff, and the monks took off running back to the Buddha, terrified, and he offered them, he said, metta, go back, and he offered them the Metta Sutta, and go back, and so metta, loving kindness, is an antidote to fear, and they went back into the forest offering metta, loving kindness, to these the devas, and the devas were taken by it and welcomed the monks back. And so this heart practice is an antidote to fear. So offering heart practices to ourselves is a really wise thing to do. And in fact, in the Visuddhimagga, which is a later kind of systematization of the Buddha's teachings, when he talk really a lot about these heart practices, Buddhaghosa, who composed the Visuddhimagga, said, he talked about metta as metta melts the psychic pollutants, the toxic pollutants that we have. So it's not magic pixie dust where everybody's going to be happy if you throw metta at them. It's really a chipping away at our own armor, a turning towards ourselves with compassion, greeting these emotions. So we start with the ones that are bringing the most difficulty at this time. What's challenging for you right now? Can you turn towards that? Can you chip away at that armor? And, there's so much, one of my armors that I've talked about a lot was sarcasm and being a wise ass. It was just second nature to me. And it was a way of fitting in. It was a way of belonging. It was a way of, feeling that oh, I can be here because I can, you know, be funny and people will laugh and cause harm ultimately in very many occasions. And I had to be willing to let go of that. I had to be willing to chip away at that armor, or the sometimes the um, not being able to speak truth, just being out of fear. It's like, I'm terrified to tell the truth. I'm terrified to say what I think, because what if they don't like it? Horror. I talk about that all the time. That finding the capacity to say what needs to be said. The armor was keeping me terrified. But this invitation to sit and chip away, be willing, be willing, be willing, you know? And so whatever's causing us the issue, the problem in this moment, that's where we chip away. So there's a lot of armor for me that's been dismantled, and there are other pieces of the heart that are still armored. But the intention is to continue to work at that, because it's really painful to be stuck behind those walls. It's so lonely. It's a really it's a can be a harsh place. And so to be willing to turn towards, because when we turn towards, it's often not half as bad as we think it's going to be. We think the emotion, the feelings that are going to come up are way worse than uh, they actually turn out to be when we experience them. And I think this is a quote from Jack Kornfield. He said, the mind, when we start really practicing and turning towards, being willing to turn towards these deep hidden things, he says, the mind gradually yields up memories that are terrifying and that we have kept hidden. We turn towards them because there's no freedom unless we turn towards them. There's no freedom, because if we just keep trying to push them down and pack on more armor, to quote Pink Floyd, put another brick in the wall, it's just going to build a bigger wall, and it's going to be harder and harder to get free when we're trapped behind that wall. So be willing to turn towards, that fear, that discomfort. Eric Fromm said, one cannot be responsive to the world without being saddened very often. If we say no to the sadness, we cannot be connected. We cannot be responsive. There's all the armor. There's the societal armor, the stories that we're told. Oh, you're not good enough. You don't fit in. You don't look right. There's that. There's all the stuff that we have to deal with. So why wouldn't we be compassionate toward ourselves? Why wouldn't we? Because we're told, blah, 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 blah. Whatever the story is, whatever your story is, whatever your armor is, can you be willing to turn towards it? And I want to read a passage from the first Buddhist book I ever read by Pema Chodron, Start Where You Are, which I'd lent to somebody many years ago and never got back, but was recently gifted from someone. So thank you, Rachel. And I want to read this passage because this is basically what I'm talking about when I talk about living with an undefended heart. It's the book Start Where You Are by Pema Chodron. And I say start where you are all the time. Start where you are all the time, because you really can't be anywhere else. So she said, when you begin to touch your heart or let your heart be touched, you begin to discover that it's bottomless, that it doesn't have any resolution, that this heart is huge, vast, and limitless. You begin to discover how much warmth and gentleness is there, as well as how much space. Your world seems less solid, more roomy and spacious. The burden lightens. In the beginning, it might feel like sadness or a shaky feeling accompanied by a lot of fear, but your willingness to feel the fear, to make fear your companion, is growing. You're willing to get to know yourself at this deep level. After a while, this same feeling begins to turn into a longing to raise, tear down all the walls, a longing to be fully human and to live in your world without always having to shut down and close off when certain things come along. it begins to turn into a longing to be there for your friends when they're in trouble, to be of real help to this poor, aching planet. Curiously enough, along with this longing and this sadness and this tenderness, there's an immense sense of well-being, unconditional well-being, which doesn't have anything to do with pleasant or unpleasant, good or bad, hope or fear, disgrace or fame. It's something that simply comes to you when you feel that you can keep your heart open. So I think, and that's it, that's the liberatory process of living with an undefended heart. It's what the Buddha invites us to do, not using necessarily those words, but to let go of clinging and craving and wanting things to be different. That's where the freedom is. That is the path to realization. That's the path to Nibbana. Nibbana is the cessation of all this holding on to stuff. And so and that's what armor is, holding on. Gotta have this. Gotta. If we can just release and open into allow this moment to be and greet it wisely and kindly, that's freedom. So I invite you to reflect on this. What is it like for you to live with an undefended heart? Or is it challenging? Is it even something you want to think about? I always say, even if it's like not now, maybe hold it out a couple of paces, put it across the room and let it sit there and let it percolate for a while and see if it makes sense. And maybe see how you have um, already gotten rid of some of the armor. Since you have been practicing for a while, what armor have you chipped away at, and where are you finding more space and more freedom for your life in your lives? I think it's really, really, really a worthwhile reflection. So thank you so much, my dear friends. I really appreciate your kind attention.